All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dig into a really powerful idea from Michael Parenti's book, Blackshirts and Reds. It's all about a five-letter word. A word so controversial that it's practically been erased from how we talk about things in public. So what is it? Let's find out.
So to kick things off, let's start with a question. Just think about it for a second. What do you think is the most controversial five-letter word in America? Seriously, what's the first word that pops into your head?
Okay, got something? Well, whatever you're thinking of, chances are it's not the word we're going to talk about today. See, the real answer points to something huge, a concept that really shapes our lives in some profound ways, but it's one we kind of just don't see. It's hidden in plain sight.
And there you have it. The word is class. According to Michael Parenti, that's the one. He makes his argument that the whole concept of class is so fiercely avoided in public conversations that it's basically become taboo. You know, the very act of just saying it, talking about a ruling class or a working class, it just gets shut down, right? Dismissed as, like, old-fashioned, irrelevant jargon.
So, why? Why is class such a dirty word? Well, to really get it, we've got to look at this really powerful myth that sort of stepped in to take its place. And here's that myth. It's the idea that Parenti really goes after. It's this belief that, except for a few really rich people and a few really poor people, pretty much all of us, we're all middle class, right? I mean, it's a nice thought, it's comforting, it suggests we're all kind of in the same boat together.
But how true is that comforting story really? Does it actually hold up when you start looking at the numbers? Well, historian Howard Zinn gives us a totally different perspective. And it starts with this number, 33%. Any guesses what that could be?
So in his book, A People's History of the United States, Zinn just lays out a completely different picture. He's saying that the fact that 1% of the population owned a third of all the wealth, that's not just some random statistic. No, it's a fundamental reality of our society, one that completely torpedoes that whole idea of us being a classless society.
And this brings us right back to Parenti's main point here. He argues that the term middle class, well, it's not just wrong, it's actually a really useful tool for some people. Think about it. It's this super vague label that you can stretch to include almost anybody. And when you do that, it completely hides the real dynamics at play. The real power structures, the exploitation, and the huge inequalities that are, the very definition of a class society.
Okay, so if these deep class divides are real, then Parenti says the conflict that comes from them isn't some old dusty theory you read about in a history book. Nope, it's happening right now. It's an ongoing, everyday reality.
He talks about it like a constant push and pull, between different class interests. And it plays out every single day. In our workplaces, in our politics. We're not talking about people putting up barricades in the streets. It's more about this constant, and often totally invisible fight for power and for resources.
In fact, Parenti frames this whole thing as a two-sided war. On one side, you've got what he calls capital's war, things like union busting, layoffs, and shutting down plants. And on the other side, you've got labor's fight, things like strikes, boycotts, and organizing unions. So you can really see this idea of an active, constant struggle playing out.
And this quote from Howard Zinn, it adds a really important layer here. He's reminding us that if you actually want to understand what justice is, you have to listen to these struggles. You have to pay attention, even when it gets complicated and the lines aren't perfectly clear.
Which brings up a huge question, right? If this class conflict stuff is so central, if it's a daily reality, then why do so many of the explanations we hear for social problems seem to do, well, anything to avoid talking about it?
Parenti actually has a name for this. He calls them ABC theorists. It stands for anything but class. And he uses this term to describe all the pundits and academics out there who will grab onto any explanation they can find. I'm talking cultural, psychological, whatever, just so they don't have to talk about the role of class power.
Now, this is a really critical point. The argument is not that class is the only thing that matters. Not at all. This quote from Angela Davis, where she quotes James Forman, makes it so clear. You can't just do a skin analysis, you also need a class analysis. The two have to go together, one doesn't replace the other.
So, to be super clear, looking at things through a class lens isn't supposed to erase the importance of race, or gender, or culture. Absolutely not. What Parenti argues is that it actually deepens our understanding. It helps us see how all these crucial issues are tied into the bigger picture, the overall structure of economic and political power.
So when you boil it all down, what these sources are really suggesting is that looking at the world through this lens of class, it gives you a really unique and honestly powerful way to understand how society actually works. And from this perspective, avoiding that C word, well, it's not a neutral act. It's actually a choice that ends up supporting the existing system, the status quo. Because when we don't talk about class, we fail to see the connections, right? The lines between what feel like individual problems and the huge systemic economic forces that are actually creating them.
I think this quote from Eduardo Galeano just says it so perfectly. Poverty is not written in the stars, right? Things like poverty and inequality, they aren't just accidents. They're not natural, they're not inevitable. They are the direct result of a specific system that people built, a system founded on class power and class interest.
And that really just leaves us with one last big question to think about. If Parenti and these other thinkers are onto something, if we really are taught, day in and day out, to avoid the language of class, then what does that mean? What crucial parts of our own world, of our own reality, are we just not seeing at all?